Hello.
Hello.
Hello. It feels very
God.
much like we are captainless without our Scottish captain.
Yeah, I don't know what to do
into the initial
that
part of the
image here.
show.
We are indeed.
Stat check, and this is indeed Stat Check episode 13. No one asks, how is Dataslate?
That's true. No one does ask, how is Dataslate? Just where is Dataslate?
Next week. Sometime.
Yeah, if I had to guess,
been
it's
for a month and a fucking
Chicago
half.
Open. Yeah.
It has.
Well, it turned into, please don't release this like the day before the Chicago Open rules cut off. And then it turned into,
game.
This is probably... I mean, I know you're game, Anthony, but I was not. I was like, please don't make me rush paint whatever nonsense I need in order to like rejigger my list to fit.
Anthony's all for
Dataslate.
chaos.
Yeah, Dataslate right before a GW event is how I got third at Austin with Thick City.
Adapt or die, basically. It's true. It should be just adapt or die.
I hope they do it on the Thursday and then they open it, they make it legal.
I mean, what is the... Because there isn't a list lock.
There's no list lock.
Is it you show up with, what, 7 copies of your list?
9 copies of your list, and you're like, hey, guys, you could change your list between games. Nobody would even know. They don't track it in BCP. They don't track it physically. You could switch lists between every match. No one would know except you and your opponent.
Just have 3 versions of your list depending on who you're facing.
I've got a list for Harlequins, a list for Chaos Space Marines, just a list for everyone.
It would be like Brandon's list from that RTT we did last weekend where it said warp vision depending on the meta in the bottom.
I do sometimes love seeing people's names lists. Mine for Michigan was just Pyropod returns, but it's better when they're fun and creative. Or you just see Innises, which are just a bunch of nonsense.
I would rather Innises and the Pyropod returns than the fluff and lore entries that people put with their units.
You don't love the fourth Blood Moon company of the Emperor's Children's second song, and then 5 paragraphs of story text for each character.
Yep. Yeah.
No, because when I'm trying to figure out what's in the list, it's a bit troublesome.
Well, I still remember the list, and now you know their story.
I still remember that Greater Demon spam list where each Greater Demon had a name. And then it was like a literal scroll, basically. And it was an image. And it was just a name and like 5 lines of text describing the character. And then just exalted traits and relics and things. And I was like, great.
Badly. Like, and it's just all compressed.
Yeah. It was centered. And then each character was its own paragraph, basically. So it was something. It was something. I don't know what to say else about it.
Yeah. Although those are still better than pictures of Battlescribe from your on a phone camera from your computer screen.
I'm still waiting for my ever favorite, which would be the picture of like some math done on a napkin with like a list handwritten in pen. That's what I really want.
We actually have a prime example of that in our local meta. First event that one of our really talented players went to, he submitted a picture of a napkin that had his list written on it.
I kind of love the energy of that, though. Like, I would be okay reading the occasional napkin just because of the hilarity of it. That doesn't mean all of you go out next weekend and write lists on napkins. It's a fun spice thing, not a everyday thing.
No. WTC format on a napkin, handwritten.
Yeah, for Chicago.
There you go.
You're just going to hand out
This is what I think of your app, GW. Enjoy.
Yeah. That's a better output than the app. Come on.
True.
Don't bully napkins.
Are you going to give them some Kleenex too for their tears when you're done with them? Is that what's going to happen?
No, I say to that deserves one of these.
A judgment token. You've been judged. All right, I guess we should do the actual first segment of the show, which is how everybody's weekend went. And we're going to start with Anthony.
Oh, shit. How was my weekend? What a great question that I was not philosophically prepared to answer, you know? What
Why?
did I do this? Oh, I was a terrible degenerate this weekend. So I didn't do anything with my weekend because I wasn't playing a 40K event, but also my girlfriend wasn't around. So that means I played video games for like 18 hours a day, sustained on coffee and ice cream for 2 days. It was the fucking shit show. Yeah, it was bad. It's really bad. I don't know what happens. Like the degeneracy just sits like one layer below the top, and it's just always on the hunt for opportunities to escape.
I mean, really, you've just answered the question of what does it mean to be an adult?
Yeah.
Unsupervised.
I won't lie. My wife, when she goes out of town, the degeneracy definitely does come up to the next level where I'm like, what could I do all weekend? I
Nothing.
could eat 5,000 calories of McDonald's and play video games because why not?
I basically become feral. It's not good.
Sam with a good question. Did you have fun though?
Yeah, I did. I wanted to like give some like funny, stupid. No, I hated myself the whole time, but that's just not true. Yeah, it was still fun.
Good.
But yeah, things are going pretty good. We're doing trying to organize some Team USA stuff. Hopefully, maybe question mark. Who knows? I'm not in charge, so I'm kind of just gone rogue. And we're doing what we can with what we got. But I am excited for GW Chicago. I followed the LGT coverage like glue because I had a lot of homies over there doing stuff. Special specific shout outs to Vic Vijay and Nassim. Mr. 4 has now become 9 Chini. He kept his 1 though, so good job, Nas. You merely got second at the second largest event of the entire year. You incredible human being. Actual good job. I'm very proud. So yeah, that was my weekend. How about you, Nathan?
I went to a GT called the Mission GT, which had one of the stranger scoring methods that I'd seen recently, which was fine. I went 3-0 day 1. I played a Space Wolves player, a Chaos Knights player, and then I played a Sisters of Battle player to cap off day 1 with my Power Pod list, and I went 3-0 going into day 2. And then I played Yunari, picked terrible secondaries, made a couple bad tactical decisions, and lost my 4th game. So because of various things that were going on, I decided to go home a little early and catch on my 5-hour ride because I had been mathematically eliminated from basically getting anything from the event. I will say, though, that the event itself was run amazingly well and was a great experience. Shout out to Nurgle Matt, who was actually physically there, which was funny. He actually said, "Hi, I'm Nurgle Matt, and I love your show," and I felt very touched by this.
That's so kind.
That's so sweet.
I know. It was actually one of the lovelier things that happened was just Nurgle Matt being effusively nice about our show.
That is nice. I'm still not entirely convinced that Nurgle Matt's not a collective. I think that's multiple people. But you met at least a shard of the greater power that is Nurgle Matthew.
I wouldn't be surprised if Nurgle Matt, much like Nurgle's Flies, was not in fact a hive of people.
Ah. That makes sense. There's 7 of them.
Yeah, at least
That'd
7. Probably 777 of them.
Yeah,
based
like
on the
that.
number of
Oh,
streams that the guy watches. Yeah,
he's very powerful.
Got to be the triplet blessing. Other than that, I've been prepping a little bit for the Open for this week. Anthony will be here, which will be great. Fox Wolves will be here, who is Anthony's compadre, which will be great. And then there's a bunch of people coming into Chicago, which is kind of novel. I don't know. Don't usually get to see all of, like the Art of War folks and people who are flooding into the city for this event, which will be nice.
Yes, my beloved homeboy from Iceland, Haidar, is going to be there. Literally wearing his
Haidar's
right now.
Excellent. I am looking forward to meeting all sorts of fun people because I didn't get to do that and anything else as recently. Although I did get to meet TJ, which was fun.
TJ's pretty great.
But yeah, that was my weekend. I played 40K. It was a good time. I played great opponents all weekend. Lost just the one game. Probably should have played round 5 just to get the experience in, but decided to cut and run. But yeah, nothing but kudos to the event runners for that one, though. Jeremy, How was your weekend?
before I get into it, to answer Gitly Gaming's question, the Michigan GT's pairings and rankings were done by battle points, not by wins or win path. So it meant that there was some rather wonky scoring at the end. We had a 5-0 player in 9th below several 4-1s.
There was like a 3-2 player in the top 10 playing orcs, I think was what happened. I was looking at the overall placings this morning and was like, oh, look, a 3-2.
Yeah, there were a few people who scored very high in a couple losses that ended up placing much higher than those that just won all of their games. So that was kind of interesting. It was apparently in the player pack, so that's just the way things are run down there. Don't know why.
It was that.
TOs, reach out to us. Answer why you did that, because it's very unique.
The other thing that was interesting to see was the sheer number of Tau that were at the event. I think I've never seen more Tau than at the Michigan GT, where it was like, I haven't run the numbers, but it felt like a third of the armies that were there were Tau armies. And maybe it's just the Ogden effect on his own meta.
Yeah.
He definitely does the faction proud and brings a lot of other people out to it when he has those kind of success. Oh, there we go. Fred Fortman in chat just said the Michigan GT has been battle points forever. So it's just their way of doing things, I guess. That's interesting. My weekend was pretty interesting. I played in an Ironman on Saturday. For those that don't know, that's 5 rounds, 1 day. My local game store has gotten a whole bunch of people absolutely hooked on the idea of doing this. I enjoy it. It's kind of fun. It's nice getting a GT's worth of games in a single day. So that way I have Sunday to rest, relax, and hobby. I went 4-1. My one loss was to our local guard player who was running 7 Demolisher tanks. And 7 Demolisher tanks do a number on Imperial Knights.
Yeah. It gets you good
loss
to
show
Imperial
and
Guard
die.
tag.
Yeah, I do have the loss to Imperial Guard tag now, but that's fine because I've also handed that tag out to multiple people over the last year.
That's true.
Then aside from that, I've just been hobbying up my Votan, which, that should be a lot of fun.
It's funny because all I see on your desk on top of a box of Votan is like 3 Manticores and then a couple Earthshakers and a couple Chimeras and then maybe a Baneblade on that box.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of reorganizing and trying to figure out where I'm going to store my guard. So currently it's stored on top of the Votan box.
Where he's going to
trying to keep the Votan down
the Votan.
in the empty Votan box.
Actually, it's got a whole bunch of half-completed sprues in there because the Votan box came with the full kits, and there is an insane number of options for everyone in there.
Oh, that's awesome, though.
Yeah,
I should send you yours, Nathan. That feels like a thing I should do.
Like, just as an example, this is with 2 guys taken off of it. There's 1 more guy coming off, and then there's going to be an extra, 20 heads and another dozen or so bits that I've got left.
And Anthony, you might as well just wait for the Warhammer 40K Commander stuff to come out, because might as well send
then I can send it at the same time. Yeah,
that's true. Send all the 40K shit to Nathan. It'll be great. Everybody will have a good time with it.
That seems good.
So I guess we should talk. Well, briefly, we'll say Innes is just taking a breather and we'll be back next week. Innes had the LGT over the weekend and the LGT Invitational before it and is just kind of exhausted. So he's taken a well-deserved day off to rest himself and his voice and to come back to us next week. Does somebody want to do the shout outs and then we can transition into our fun stat section and do our stuff?
Just check
do the shout outs later.
All right, we'll just do it later.
Yeah, just check the description. All the links are there. It's just funny that Innes has to memorize them.
It is true. Yeah. Part of it is just to torture Innes and not just to torture us.
Yeah, we don't need to be tortured by that. We have other stuff we can be tortured by.
So I guess we can just pop into the stats for this weekend. We'll go through win rate stuff, and then we can talk about some highlights from the weekend, and then we can talk about overall meta stats.
That seems real. I'm going to mute and lean back and let you dudes do stat stuff.
Cool. So I'm just going to pull the numbers from the master spreadsheet that causes my computer to crash now because of how much data we've collected at this point, Jeremy.
Yeah, we have now crossed, for anyone who's interested, we now have 16,400 player entries, about 9,500 of them are unique, and over 42,000 games tracked in GT Plus games since the beginning of February. So since the ITC season rolled over.
So it's over 40,000 at this point. Good job, guys. For this weekend, we don't have quite 40,000 games. I know, Anthony, that was a bad joke. Tyranids had the highest win rate of the weekend at 60.6. Harlequins were in second, and then Chaos Demons are surging at 55.5. Tau not that far behind. I actually think people have kind of discounted Tau a little bit, but based on how they've been performing with that double Sunshark bomber list with a Riptide and then a Crisis Suit Bomb, they're actually quite dangerous if somebody manages to pilot the armies successfully. They came out with a 54%. Imperial Knights just behind there at 53%. Chaos Space Marines continue to show up with 52%. Oh, wow, this is actually out of order. What the heck did I do? It doesn't really matter. Then we have Sisters, Drukhari, and actually Orcs at above 50% win rate for the weekend.
Yeah, Drukhari are at 54% this weekend. So, Anthony, when are you switching back to them?
When they get a 10th edition book, bro.
He's YOLOing into Drukhari for the Chicago Open. Just don't let anybody know. So actually,
I'm just gonna play Fixed again.
That's funny. And it is interesting because Chaos Space Marines win rate, I don't think really reflects how well they did at some of the events this weekend. Like 4 of the top 10 at LGT, which was the largest event of the weekend, were Chaos Space Marine factions. 2 of those were Emperor's Children, and 2 of those were Creations of Bile. I know I'm just going to ruin all your secret tech on air, Anthony. I'm sorry. Tau were also in the top 4 of that event, and then Tyranids were 4th at that event. Chaos Demons won an event in Germany, and then Tau won an event, and then Chaos Demons went undefeated alongside Yunari, also going undefeated at the Michigan GT. And then Deathwatch won an event, although they were also undefeated with 2 Imperial Knights lists at the Fantasia Fanatic, which is kind of neat. 3 undefeated lists in the top 3.
Yeah, it was, although they did have a bunch of draws there.
That's true. Otherwise, I think the weekend's pretty standard, other than starting to see Chaos Demons take home events, and then Gene Stealer, otherwise at 25 plus man, 5 plus round events, it's pretty much more of the same outside of a surge of demon stuff, and then Chaos Space Marines really taking home big trophies this weekend.
Yeah, probably the most interesting thing is Emperor's Children, which won the LGT this weekend, only had a 53% win rate.
Yeah, they were very much considered, I think, the second fiddle to Creations of Bile, with Creations of Bile being the number 1 most powerful Chaos Space Marines. Sometimes even the 3rd best. Sometimes people were saying that Word Bearers were better than Emperor's Children as well. Emperor's Children just kind of coming from 3rd place in most people's hearts to take 1st. Kind of neat. I'm sure Anthony will have words about it for later in the meta section as well. If we,
I mean, the numbers back that up. Creations are pushing 60%. Word Bearers are pushing 56%. So those 2 are really pulling up the CSM numbers. And then you have World Eaters, Iron Warriors, and Night Lords dragging them down.
Yeah, I'll be interested to see what the overall dashboard update looks this week once Cliff gets a hold of all that data and gets to update the dashboard so we can see what the summed win rates for some stuff looks like. Be interested to see also what the win rate for sub factions are starting to look like as well, and some of the win rates for those sub factions and other things, especially for that Emperor's Children data set. But who knew that ignoring all of the modifiers on things and then whatever other tech Anthony wants to talk about later in the show for Emperor's Children might be good.
Yeah,
just a little
bit pretty good. And then you've got the insanity of almost army-wide fight first, too.
Yeah, who knew fight phase manipulation also strong? Not like people didn't hate fighting all sorts of other stuff like Fight Last Archons and stuff with Drazar paired with them or anything like that. Definitely not. That's otherwise, fine. The meta continue. If you look at the dashboard for up through September 25th, the meta continues to look relatively healthy and also relatively stable. There's only a few factions that are outside of 60%. Some factions do continue to suffer in the doldrums, mostly Imperial Fists and Crimson Fists, who are barely visible on our dashboard website at this point. They basically have 1 knuckle that's in the visible pane at this point. So we do have a couple factions who are just kind of outside where we would like them to be. and hopefully the Dataslate, which we said no one is asking how it is doing, comes in and does a good job and kind of balances some of that stuff out. I don't know what you want to say, Jeremy. I didn't calculate overrep for this weekend because I am buried in work, but I'm sure it will look like.
It'll probably look fairly similar to what we've seen for the last little while. Actually, we can even just look at TWIP overrep, which is something that I do track pretty rapidly. If I look at that real quick.
Sure, why don't you pull that up, and then I can also tell folks that I've updated the ELO, CRS, and then the faction rankings have been updated by Jeremy. So if you want to look at how those things have changed over time, the faction rankings have not changed very much, but you can see the CRS scores for Tyranids and Harlequins are over 1900, which is quite high, especially compared to the
200. I think there's a 200-point gap between 2 and 3 now.
Yeah, there's a almost 200-point gap between Harlequins and Eldaria. Eldaria are at 1719 and Harlequins are at 1906. And then for the CRS rankings, there has been a slight change, I think, in the rankings. These were updated. Were these updated today? Because I have Manny still in first. Is that accurate?
I believe Manny actually just retook it.
Okay.
With his performance at the LGT, because he kind of went undefeated. His one game where he took a loss on the stats was a little weird how it worked out. So I basically pulled that game out of the numbers because there was enough contention between the two players that I just didn't feel it was necessary to keep it in there.
Okay. So yeah, then our top 5 for CRS right now is Manny, and then Vic Vijay in second, Tom Ogden in third, David Gaylord in fourth, and then Jack Harpster is in fifth for rounding out our top 5. 6 through 10 is TJ Lanigan in sixth, our own Innes Wilson in seventh, Nassim in eighth, Marshall Peterson in ninth, which is a name that I'm not very familiar with, and then Anthony of Violence Vince Turbo fame in 10th.
That's me.
Here's hoping that he buffs that a little bit this week.
God, yeah, I fucking hope so.
We've got to get our CRS back to where everybody's mad at us for the CRS ranking. All of us by all of us, I mean the two
Innocent Anthony
in first place on things. Let's not even talk about mine. Mine is like very much in like the average portion of that graph.
Yeah, so I pulled up the TWIP data for the weekend. TWIP is kind of weird because it can be kind of overrepresented by just a few performers over a 1-week period. Mm-hmm. But this week it was actually interesting. There's no army above a 2.0 TWIP ratio. So basically, TWIP is tournaments in winning position, a measure of how often an army goes 4 wins in a row or better. So basically, when you put yourself in striking distance of a podium at a 5-round event, or continue to do better, you go 5 wins and then lose on the 6th round of a 6-round event. So the highest of them all is Tyranids, where they have a TWIP percentage. So basically, a representation of them being in the tops of tournaments of 14.7% with a meta rep of 7.4%. So that's about a 2.0 ratio. And then from there, it drops off pretty steeply. The next highest is actually Chaos Space Marines at 1.48, where they make up just under 12% of the tournament podium potentials, and they made up 8% of the meta this weekend. Interestingly enough, Harlequins kind of dropped off. They're only at a 1.4 this week. But again, they only make up 3% of the meta, so their numbers tend to skew wildly from week to week.
Yep. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, that just continues to support the notion that we've had that the situation for the meta is very good.
Yeah.
The meta is relatively open. New factions are coming in and winning events and kind of going in. And there's really only a few factions that are kind of just really outside of that window at this point. And we'll have to see, I guess, what the slate will bring. And if the slate brings big adjustments that like really mess with the meta, along with Votan coming in to events starting probably this week. A number of events post Votan nerfs have started to include Votan wholesale, although the GW Open this week is only allowing models that are in the starter box at the event. And then I do know of some GTs that are continuing to wholesale ban the book until the full model line is out through the end of October, which includes some local GTs like the Dragonfall GT in Wisconsin. Here in the Midwest is not allowing Votan models until the whole range is released to just avoid needing to approve like 80 million conversions from Votan players, which totally understandable as a TO. If you're like 1 or 2 TOs running an event, you don't want 30 people to send you emails with detailed conversions asking for you to approve them.
Here's 79 million 3D printed Hecaton land fortresses to start. Enjoy. Yep. They're all varying dimensions, varying.
To put up a thing as the TO and be like, get your 3D prints from this man, and then they're legal. That won't be shamed on at all.
Definitely not.
Sounds like a certain event in Spain did that last year, where they banned China cast 3D prints unless it was 3D printed by one of the TO's friends.
Oh, man, that doesn't sound great. That seems like a bad look, guys.
It was a terrible look.
Let's not do that.
I actually love
it. I'm pretty sure this was the same tournament that the Austrian painter showed up at.
Ah, fair. On the topic of Votan, do we want to talk about the nerfs a little bit as we transition into meta segment? Might be worth it.
Yeah. Sure. Wait a minute. Where's the Scotsman? Sorry, that's a very funny comment.
I love that.
Innes is recovering from X-Intuing for the first time in the last 2 years, so he'll be back eventually. And I'm going to bully him about it because I got bullied about it for forever, so fuck him.
Yeah, only Innes and only Anthony can bully people for a 4-2 record at events.
He went 3-2. He didn't even win the sixth one.
Oh, sorry. My apologies.
Yeah, he could have lost again. He probably wouldn't have, but he could have.
We love you, Innes.
Again. All right,
we do love Innes dearly, and we do want him to come back to the show next week. So we do love you, Innes. Please come back, especially because you're the only person who knows how to do the entry sequence and all of the plugs.
Yeah,
we are got to do it. That. Yeah. I guess now is a good time to shout out. Links are in the doobly-doo below. Check out our Patreon if you really like the work that we're doing. Check out the Stat Check website where we have the meta dashboard that should hopefully be updated later this week once Cliff finds some spare time from his very, very busy work and dad life schedule. And yeah, Nathan mentioned, the CRS and ELO and faction rankings have all been updated, so go check those out, share them, yell at me because you don't think that your favorite player or yourself is ranked high enough.
Actually, please don't do
Sometimes
that. But you can
makes errors.
Yep. If you do notice an error, please let us know. Like, send us an email. We do have an actual official email you can send actual complaints and questions and comments to, which is on the website. Otherwise, you can
just DM me.
pay. You can pay to be in the Patreon, and then you can actually slide into my DMs and yell at me there, or slide into an appropriately named channel and yell at me there as well. I may or may not respond to it. I may or may not just block you. I don't know. We'll find out. It's a roulette of how busy I am.
Yeah. You have to fuck around in order to find out.
It's true. You do have to fuck around in order to find out, and that may cost you $5 to do so a month. Congratulations.
Hey, it's Naz. Congratulations once again. Hey. An absolutely amazing run this weekend.
The people's fucking champion, dude.
All right. So Votan, dead and buried. Every Votan group on the internet burning their models, throwing them in grinders. Scalpers selling them for below market prices. The Votan stonks have crashed.
Yeah,
all because GW.
Votan player base again proving to be my least favorite player base outside of Custodes. Boy, do those folks complain a lot for having one of the strongest armies in the game. Jesus Christ, calm down.
But my list went up 450 points. It's not viable anymore. I had to cut a whole land fortress.
That list shouldn't have been 2,000 points to start with, and you deluded yourself into thinking that it was okay.
But Anthony, my sixes, my auto hits no longer are sixes to wound, and my railguns no longer work.
Your automatic wounds don't trigger additional rules.
Yeah.
It seems
What will I do
rough,
without
dude.
it? I know.
I don't
It is
know.
terrible.
What do
Maybe-
you think you are, an Eldar player?
Yeah. Well, also, like, not even like a Title 1
What?
sub-faction.
What shuriken weapon causes like
Does it on a
2d3
4.
plus 6 damage and splashes
Yeah.
damage? Every time somebody
Oh,
talks
also-
about Hail of Doom being comparable to it, I'm like, there isn't a shuriken cannon that does anything like 90% of the Votann weapons do, guys. What is the complaint?
Dude, I would play Eldar right now if Hail of Doom triggered on a 4 but didn't trigger the rule. No problem. You got it.
It'd be pretty fucking good.
Just
Yeah.
fight hordes.
Yeah,
of- just be right back to scat bikes, or not scat bikes, but shuriken cannon bikes and dire avengers coming out of things, firing twice.
Whatever you
Auto
want.
wounding on 4s into like knights with massed multiple AP weapons. Yeah, I'll do that any day of the week, guys. Come
Yeah.
on.
But I'll take Guardian Defenders at that point. We can game with the regular Gat blasting troops.
Mm-hmm. I think people have forgotten that getting to skip a whole step, like a variance that like takes away your successes, is really good.
Yeah.
Really strong.
And especially when you bypass one of the biggest defense mechanisms in the game, which is toughness.
Yep. Like there's a whole faction, a sub-faction of Tyranids, like the best one, that uses the ability to not wound them very efficiently as their major defensive mechanism. And you get to skip it. You skip the whole thing.
Yep.
Basically. The nerfs aren't that bad, and y'all a bunch of complainers.
The
Yeah,
nerfs
can't
are
believe-
probably not enough.
Yeah.
They're probably not enough.
Yep.
Like the army is going to, once it comes into full release and all the models are available and tournaments lift their restrictions on it, it's going to come out of the gate absolutely swinging. Now it might not, because people might hate building these fuckers because they
I don't think
decided
those
that these
things
things
are
need
that
like
good.
they're decent, but like they're an annoying kit to build. That's all.
Good.
Good.
I
You
hope
should
all-
need to pay in your blood, sweat, and tears in order to get those best units built.
Yeah, they're still not as
I
bad
hope-
as Tomb Blades.
I hope
Few things are
Zerker
as bad
heads
as
are
Tomb
3
Blades.
parts.
3-part heads. I love that.
The ears are
Yeah.
each one part, and they have to slot in
Yeah.
correctly.
The hammer
and
is
if you
made
slot
of
them
this
wrong-
manifold.
If you slot them wrong,
Yeah.
a blood letter appears and smacks you upside the head out of like the freaking warp.
Yeah.
Just comes out.
No.
No.
If you slot them wrong, the hammer doesn't fit. Like, it's just a mess.
Ah.
I hope that's how it works.
Yeah, I think people are also complaining. A bunch of people have also started complaining about how, because the points have changed, they deserve like receiving a new codex with all the new points changes inserted into it.
If
Mm.
anything, what this really highlights is the fact that points shouldn't be in the books in the first place. They should just be purely digital. So that on release day, GW publishes and say, here's the points.
Mhm.
Which means that you can then update them on a quarterly, weekly, monthly, whatever iteration. I think quarterly is probably the best way to go about it. But then they just get updated in there, and that's your repository for it. Like, but I'm also of the opinion that like rules shouldn't even be in the codex. That should also be digital and just be available for either a fee or even free. And codexes, you buy your codex and you get your lovely lore and your crusade rules and your fluff. But I mean, rules change.
Listen, man.
It's the nature of the game.
I honestly think that the only physical versions of codexes that should be sold are the collector's editions. That's the only physical version of a codex that should be sold. So somebody who loves a faction so much that they want to buy that special cover, that's the only way you get a physical copy of your codex. You just buy that and you get one. Otherwise, everything should just be a fully digital rule set, and it can be updated at a whim, like Jeremy said, so that the whole freaking ecosystem is digital. Means everything can be updated whenever there's a problem. You don't have to worry about your codex missing pages when it's published. Poor Space Wolves. You won't have to get mailed a missing page in the mail from GW or something. I don't know how they rectified that actually, and have to like
They
stick
had
it into your book.
Yeah, they actually had. So Anthony, this is I think before your time. The 8th edition Space Wolves Codex, when it came out, was missing pages. Like it had just completely misprinted. And so when you went and bought a Space Wolves Codex, at least this is how it was handled for me and my friends locally, the store owner had photocopies of the missing pages and they handed it to you with the book. And it wasn't like a lore page, it was a rules page that was missing. So it was just like, yeah, what do my warlord traits do again? It's not in the book.
That seems bad.
You know, just it was pretty brutal.
Also,
I think it's the last big mistake GW's made in terms of prints.
Well, besides the entirety of the Votan Codex, sure.
And Drukhari and Admech and Tau and Custodes and Custodes was more let's give them day 1 point cuts because they were underpowered.
Yeah, that.
I will also say that the one thing about Votan and the stuff is that it illustrates that when the community actually does kind of come together in response to something, and especially when groups of tournament organizers and competitive players like make their opinions very vocally heard, and there are tournament bans and stuff like that. Like obviously GW created a response based on the response from the competitive community in order to fix a book much more rapidly than could whatever have happened previously. And I do think it's good that GW did that. And I also think it's a good sign that the community has a voice and can actually shift how GW does things for the future, which I think are good things that have come out of like this whole fracas.
Or if you're Spiky Bits, also, GW has lost control of their IP and the customers are now in control, because that's such a terrible thing for us to actually have a say over the game that we invest hundreds, if not thousands of dollars in a year.
One would honestly think that customers usually control your product anyways, since they control it by buying it. But, you know, neither here nor there.
The other thing, too, is that this change does not actually impact casual Votan players because they didn't touch power level, which is what's used for all the competitive systems.
So if you want to play Crusade and lose friends, go right ahead.
I mean, for the people out there that are like, I don't even want to play this army no more. I was just here for the lore. Now it's nerfed and I can't play it. You're mask offing yourself a little bit there, bro. You're not looking great when you're like, I was just casual. Why am I getting hit? It's like, well, you didn't. So maybe wind it in a couple of steps, just a bit.
Never. No. 100% not. Maximum.
Yes, easy peasy. I would pay good money to actually grab a video of Anthony doing exactly that. Saying that he can't wait for the Chicago Open for someone to be complaining about Votan being bad, and Anthony goes up and just yells at them.
Hopefully it's not on day 3, so I don't do it in an Art of War jersey.
Have you decided what your jersey rotation is going to be for the Chicago Open?
Yeah, it's going to be Miami Dice, Australia, and Art of War.
Nice.
No Scotland?
It might be. I can't find this jersey.
Oh,
so
if you can find it,
that's somewhere, but I don't know where.
I feel like I would fit in it, and I'll wear it if you can find it.
Yeah, that's fair.
I feel like that looks maybe a little strange on our Short King member of our staff.
It's definitely a bit big. As a professional, not tall person, it is not appropriately sized.
No. Rahal, you're going to have to explain what we should have as a Patreon goal. Is it going to be just Anthony yelling at people? Because Anthony will do that for free. Anthony will go into voice chat and will just yell at you for free, basically, at this point.
I mean, I'll do it way better for money. I'll have like reasons and stuff. But if you just want me to no scope rant at someone, yeah, I'll do that for free.
Okay, we're gonna find the Votan players. We're gonna figure out which tables they're at, and then we're gonna send in Anthony to them and just ask them, "So how's your game going?" And when they bitch about the codex being nerfed,
Anthony will just start. He'll just go. He'll just dig in. He'll grab his spray bottle. He will spray them, and then he will yell at them.
My branded spray bottle.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Hello, Dan. Yeah. So that's the Votan nerfs. They deserved it. They will probably need more to come back all the way in line. Yeah, it's definitely going to be a thing.
Turbo's Truths.
It's not going to be Turbo's Truths. That's really
So
funny.
many, like what grinds my gears segment, basically from Family Guy, essentially, but Turbo's Truths. Fair.
Where the altitudes you only do it.
Anthony, do you want to talk a little
Nathan,
bit about
how
Go
hard
for
would it be for me to get a tattoo on that Thursday night?
You don't get in until like 9 p.m. into the city itself.
I know what I said. It's a city though, right?
Yeah, it's a city. You want me to find you a hotel or a tattoo place where you could get a tattoo done late at night? Sure, I can do that.
If you can find me one, I will get the WTC one that I owe done.
Okay. I'll check with
So
I'll see what I can find for you. I'm pretty sure I can find some place where they'll do
right.
a simple design for you.
Perfect.
Gotcha, bud.
All right. What did you I think that's called prison. Listen, ideally not.
let's not. I was going to ask Anthony to talk a little bit about Emperor's Children performance this weekend. Maybe shed some light on why we're seeing Emperor's Children and what is the goings-ons and why we're seeing them show up so much.
So Emperor's Children are funny for performance as a faction because Emperor's Children isn't like mega complex to play. It's not like the hardest thing in the game, but there's like a series of things that you need to like know how to do really well. Character placement, fight phase control, need to know your stratagems. It's not the fastest army in the world, so positionally being like a turn ahead is really important. But the disparity between someone that does know how to do that and doesn't know how to do that is massive on Emperor's Children specifically. Emperor's Children carries you basically never. Emperor's Children lets you not get randomly screwed really well. So, in the hands of like a competent, consistent pilot with a game plan that will work most of the time, they'll be able to win way more often than they lose. We will never see Emperor's Children hit the win rates that Creations did, because Creations you can just like, and I am a very aggressive player, and I get very upset when people describe playing aggressively as just like vomiting your models into the middle and then winning. You can literally do that as Creations because it doesn't actually matter if you get traded on or fought last or positioned whatever. Your characters can be in the wrong spots and get murked from like someone charging around. Like it doesn't matter because they still get to swing. Is it better to not do that? Will more competent players win more consistently? Sure, but you definitely get carried by bile. Whereas like Emperor's Children doesn't really do that in the same way, and you can see that from like as a general rule of thumb, when something has really powerful stratagems versus really powerful chapter tactics, is where you start to see that dichotomy, right? Emperor's Children have super strong stratagems, stuff that happens reactively or proactively if you planned around it the step before. Whereas bile is just like, real strong all time. So it's a little bit easier to kind of execute with. I've definitely heard like really funny takes the last couple of days. Like people that just like clearly don't have like the time experience or like, you know, level needed to play Emperor's Children at the most effective levels. Just like all sorts of crazy stuff, or just like clearly they like, and this is not necessarily their fault, but like sometimes people don't have access to as strong of metas or as strong of like an Emperor's Children player close to them. So they develop weird takes around it that maybe they should calm down a little bit about because they don't really know. Emperor's Children armies like on paper tend to look like there's not a lot of units until those units like 2/3 of them are alive on turn 4, and you're like, hey man, what the fuck is this? Why are these all still here? Because you couldn't interact with them meaningfully until that point, and half your army's dead or more. There's a lot of like steps to why the Emperor's Children stuff is good. My favorite one lately is I've seen a whole lot of people being like, dude, Abaddon's not even good, and that is hilarious. A well-played Abaddon is like night and day from a poorly played Abaddon. Yeah, it's just it's the Drazar thing again, where people are like, I don't get it. How do you get tabled by Draz? And it's like, if the person's good with him, you'll never touch him, and he'll just kill everything that he touches every turn. So,
what's the example of like good Abaddon play, like from a game that you've recently done, or just like in general? Like what is like the good versus bad Abaddon play?
So bad Abaddon play looks like not like he is wound gated, but it's pretty easy to just dump 3 wounds on him, and you can't heal him in Emperor's Children. It's like once every wound that's on him is permanent, right? Every time he takes a wound, you've lost 1 out of 1/9 of your total pool. You only get 9. He's like a cat. You get 9 shots. So you gotta, like in Emperor's Children as an example, in my list that runs Lucius, what I will often do is for 2 turns, I will use Lucius inside the Terminator brick. Like Lucius will move first, and the Terminator brick moves around him. And then the Terminator brick fucks off and charges 20 inches because people keep forgetting that they can do that. And then Lucius is kind of just hanging out. He's not really doing anything super useful at that point. So what he does is he runs over to Abaddon and holds hands with him. And what happens then is that if you want to engage Abaddon, you get a face full of Lucius. Lucius has a fight last. Sometimes Lucius has 2 fights last, which means that if you charge the 2 of them, you fucking die, which takes the melee phase away from you. So now you have to try to kill Abaddon with shooting. He's a screenable character. Psychic. That's why there's 15 possessed in the list, because that's 45 wounds worth of chumps, etc., etc. That's basically the difference, is that like a good player will leverage him turn over turn, and bad execution looks like relying on his wound gate, failing 3-4 up saves, and then going, the dice scammed me. Like, that's not real. You just shouldn't have been in that position. So yeah,
getting eaten by a hive tyrant. Bad plan.
Yeah, that's not great. You can see really high level Abaddon usage and like the risk versus reward of playing to your outs on the Facebook live streams if they're still up from LGT. Because Vic and Alexandria play a mirror, which is a part where Abaddon is very hard to utilize. And then you can watch Alexandria play Nos in the end. He actually makes a pretty rough mistake at the end that almost costs him the game, because he shoots the Crisis to death, and the Crisis failed to explode because Nos rolled the 1. But if he didn't do that and the Crisis blew up and killed Abaddon, that would have been a massive error. So you have to be very careful about how your wounds go down. The other thing that people often mistake too is they don't use the chapter flip effectively. So like as an example, the RTT I played the last weekend, I was playing against Luke, and Luke had like the way the character combat had basically gone is that like he had killed a good portion of my army. He still had 2 of his characters alive, but most of his army was dead. And he had Lucius and his Disco very close to each other. So I put Abaddon, who was on 3 wounds, into Creation's Vial and jammed him into Lucius and the Disco at the same time, which he got fought lasted and killed, but took them both with him. Stuff like that is a huge deal, and remembering to do things like that really changes the dynamic of, again, like a good Abaddon versus a bad one. So, yep, those are just some of the way. Then that's just the Abaddon portion. There's a lot more, like the constant people being like, "I'll just avoid the Terminator block," and it's like that's not like you could do that with Dark Angels, right? Like again, like a Deathwing Terminator block, you can be like, "That's never going to touch me." That doesn't work in Emperor's Children just at all. So yeah, we'll see how we go.
So to get the Emperor's Children Terminators to move 20 inches is auto advancing 6 inches and then advancing and charging, I take it, from the prayer.
Yep. So the way that works is you pray for advance and charge, which goes off on a 2-up, and then you structure your turn from there. So if you hit it, you move 11, and then you use Honor the Prince again in the charge phase, and you will charge 6 plus D6. So you're already moving minimum of 17 or minimum of 18, sorry, with the additional D6 will be at least a 1. And then you can be within 6 inches of Abaddon and go get another +1 to your charge. So when all is said and done, if those Terminators start within 20 inches of you and they end their advance within 6 inches of Abaddon, they charge you automatically. 20 inches is really far if they were just in the middle of the table. Like, most objectives are now in serious trouble, including your home field.
Yeah, 20 inches is far in turn 1. Let's be honest. Like 20 inches is far. Yeah, 20 inches is just a long way to be able to go.
Yeah. If you start on the line against them in Death and Zeal, they will charge and skullcrack your deployment zone. Like, without even a moment's hesitation. Like, what are you going to do? Die is the answer.
The answer is die.
The other thing, too, that people tend to forget is that CSM gets a lot stronger as the game goes on. When they hit their Assault Doctrine equivalent, they start getting exploding 6s on both Assault and melee weapons. It can get, like, very out of hand very fast with the amount of damage things start to do. As an example of this, my Terminator unit has 3 combi meltas in it, and I was playing a game against Chaos Knights at the RTT, and I just rolled 3 6s to hit, so that was 6 hits, so it was like they were all carrying little multi-meltas. That is a lot of unexpected damage, just flatlined an Armiger from full health. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. The exploding 6s get very out of hand very fast. So yeah, it's an army that gets stronger as the game goes on. Obviously, you run out of resources to handle Abaddon. And the whole time you're getting blasted, no pun intended, from range by Noise Marines. It hurts really bad. Those guns are strong. So yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And it is a lot more than it seems like it is the best way that I can put it. But again, only in the hands of a talented pilot. If I had $1 for every person that messaged me and was like, my buddy that plays once a year, I beat him up so bad every time we play, and he plays Emperor's Children, I'm like, all right, that's not really what I'm talking about, man.
We're talking about top 4 play at LGT kind of situations where you're playing equally high skill level players, and there's like
what's I wonder what the win rate for Emperor's Children would have been with Vic and Alex removed from it.
It's actually a good question.
That a thing that's figure out. I can do that over the next couple minutes while you continue talking. But I also want to comment, like, I've watched a lot of Emperor's Children play. I've watched you play it. I've watched other people play it at tournaments. I watched the streamed games yesterday. And I've also watched a lot of locals play Emperor's Children, often playing lists very similar to what you and Vic are running right now. I watched one play Tyranids and get 20 0'd, where it was just like, that should be a winnable matchup for you, or at the very least one that you can hold to a draw if the dice swing against you a little bit. It does take some level of player skill. It's not just unga bunga down the middle.
That makes sense, actually.
Yeah,
like, really.
It's definitely one of the harder. It's not like, I don't want to like toot the horn too hard. Like, it's not GSC. It's not like all this other stuff where it's like really hard to play and like minor mistakes will cost you massively. Like, they'll cost you big, like using the heroics effectively and stuff to hold objectives because you don't have a lot of obsec is like a thing. But like, once you're familiar with the play patterns, Emperor's Children become like basically a completely different army. And it's really, really good. So,
makes sense.
Yeah,
that's one of the. There's one other thing that I wanted to talk about tonight too, aside from Emperor's Children, is I wanted to talk about secondary strategy for selecting secondaries in games, because I know, and I wanted to talk a little bit about your approach to it and kind of see, like, when you get into a matchup, what are like the first 3 things that you do? And Jeremy, this is also a good question, I think, for you as well, because you're also like a higher skill player than I am. Like, what are the things that you look at first when you're selecting secondaries going into an opponent's army?
So I almost never, as Emperor's Children, have a secondary advantage in any game I have ever played, unless I play the mirror against someone that's playing an older version of my list that doesn't have a Psyker. And then I can take a Psychic secondary and they can't, and that's cool. But as a general rule of thumb, I'm acutely aware of the fact that my secondaries just need to score some amount of points. If my secondaries add up to like 28, 30, we're good. I need them to not lose me the game. Basically, I need to not get 0 on secondaries. And that's really where That's my entire approach. If your prisoners gives me a comfortable 9 and 11 if I table you, we're taking no prisoners, baby. Like, I don't really worry about like scoring 15s. It's not, especially in singles. Like, I don't give a single shit in singles if I win by 1 or a million. Like, it doesn't matter to me at all. So I'm just trying to take secondaries that don't feed more than I'm trying to take secondaries to get hundreds. There's no world where I like figure out my secondaries and then go, well, if I go first, I will win by 4 on turn 5, because that's not real. And anyone except one person, who I will not say because it will blow up their ego too much, that says they can do that is lying to you. I've only ever seen one person successfully do that, and not in the middle of a game with them had them go, oh, I didn't expect you to do that. Now I have to change my whole plan. Like, that is so blindingly common that people think they're just fucking Nostradamus with the game, and they aren't. So yeah, just it's okay to have a good game plan, and like it's okay to have a game plan, obviously, but like don't be like, this is just what I'm doing, and I'm definitely gonna win by like 4. That's not real.
Yeah, and then for me, it's been interesting because since the WTC, I've actually been playing Knights, which have a very weird secondary game in that I don't care what my opponent has. I don't care what my opponent brings. I acknowledge that I'm going to give up 15 on Bring It Down, and I'm going to score about 40 on my own secondary. So as long as I can hold their second and third secondary to 25 points or less, I'm going to win the game. I've been playing a lot of teams as well, so differential matters, but that's less important here. It's more just the fact that with Knights, you're almost always are going to be relying on the fact that Nephilim will ask you to take 3 faction secondaries, because you can't do the regular GT secondaries for actions because you don't have any infantry. You can't do any of the any of the Warpcraft ones because you don't have any psychers. So you would normally be relying on your opponent giving up 2 good kill secondaries and then engage or something like that. Whereas in Nephilim, because you can just take the Knight secondaries, they're actually very strong. So the Knight secondaries that I almost always am taking are Renew the Oaths, which is do an action within 6 of the center with one of my models. Honor the House, which I get an 11 or a 13 on that every single game that I've played. I've never scored less than an 11 on it because it's just play the game and you get honor and you get points. And then either Yield No Ground or Kill Secondary. And Yield, it just basically focuses on making sure that my opponent never sets foot in my deployment zone, or if they do, they die by the end of my turn. And then playing the rest of the game normally by controlling more objectives than my opponent and having good positioning. So it's one of these things where it's very different than from playing Emperor's Children, where you are looking at it and say, okay, I can get a 9 on this secondary, I can get a 9 on this secondary, I can get a 10 on this secondary. Those are the 3 that I'm going to go for, and then I'm going to make sure that my opponent doesn't score theirs. Whereas for me, I give up the 15. I just acknowledge I'm going to lose 7 Knights, because while they are durable, they do still die, and you can't hide the big ones. Yep. And then just play to win on secondaries and primary by denying them the other 2. So secondary selection is less of an issue there, as opposed to my Dark Angels, where I was always saying I'm going to take Death on the Wind, and then from there it was a big question of, does my opponent give up a good kill secondary, and can I play engage against them?
Yep.
Right. Yeah, I think the big thing to, like, as Emperor's Children 2, I'm very rarely trying to stop my opponent's secondaries. I'm almost always just trying to win on primary and being like, yep, you got 2 4s, an 8, and a 0. 16. Good luck.
Yeah, you got 45 on your secondaries, but I still beat you by 20 points.
Yeah, I don't even care. Like, it's not even a bad differential win. Whatever.
Yep. And I think that's one of the big things. And so Vader, I think it's Evan, has a really good question. It's like, how can you figure out if a secondary is bait? It's like, oh, look, they give up 16 points to assassinate, but in reality, you'll never touch the characters. And I think, at least from my perspective, that comes with experience and from knowing how the other army is going to be played or is usually played. Like a really good example of that is, and this is going to fluff his ego, is TJ.
Yep.
I played against him and I took assassinate and I scored a big fat 0 on that assassinate because I knew that it was I had to take it because I was playing my Raven Wing and I had no other good secondaries to take. But it was one of those moments where I was just like, I'm going to score a big fat goose egg on that because he knows how to protect his characters. And we have a cliff that way.
What's up, guys?
Surprise dashboard dad.
Yeah, we've got a surprise dashboard dad joining us for
That's all, mate.
for the
I bought some
latter part of
time
the
with the
show.
episode of the Magic School Bus. Here we go.
Oh, excellent.
Hell yeah. But yeah, and Galarg in chat points out Sisters is another really good example of that. Armies that can hide their characters behind layers of defense and aren't usually using their characters very aggressively assassinates a bad pick against them. But you only know that and can only recognize that by playing against it or being familiar with how that army is being played.
Yep.
Also,
So
like,
it's hard to just
sometimes
have a
we're-
blanket statement of this is a trap. Like, bring it down against knights, not a trap, because you're going to kill a few of them on the way.
Also, sometimes your only win path involves killing those fucking characters, man. Like, I'm never beating TJ's Thousand Sons or Sisters unless I'm, like, murdering their characters. So I'm gonna take Assassinate against them. But I'm really bad about Assassinate. I take Assassinate, like, the second it's on the table, because I am
3 characters?
real
Go.
confident I'm gonna get them. Yeah. That is very accurate when it comes to my stance on Assassinate. I'd be bringing the noise to people's deployment zones, and if you hide all your characters there, I will thank you for the 15.
Yeah, for me, I guess it's just easy for me to fall into the pit of I don't know what to do, so I'm going to take something and then give my opponent counterplay. Like Psychic Interrogate turned into the biggest trap in my last game against Yanari because my opponent just sat and gave me a 6 on Psychic Interrogate, which is a mistake you make until you've played the faction once and then you're like, well, I know not to do that next time.
Yeah.
I
almost always just take Ritual when I play Nids.
That's actually something that I was thinking about post, is because I took cranial feasting. Whoops. Cranial feasting. Shit. In a couple games and maxed it basically in 2 of the games that I used it in, because there's that time where your opponent can't get rid of sergeants or doesn't want to get rid of sergeant or doesn't think to get rid of sergeants their first time playing into somebody using cranial feasting, where you just take advantage of it quite nicely. Yeah. No. Oh, well. Yeah, as soon as we start getting merch up, that will be one of the first things that we make. It'll be great. Oh, no. But I think Psychic Interrogate is one of the secondaries that I'm kind of giving up on a little bit because it gives your opponent too much like actual
Agency.
ability to control your it gives them too much agency in making your decisions, whereas Ritual is a secondary that you can take, or R&D is a secondary that you can take, where you kind of control the flow of how that works, minus your opponent like using a lot of stuff to screen you control those things a little bit better in those situations. And I think that's just my problem generally with some of the action secondaries, is that you give your opponent agency in some of those situations to deny you those actions.
Yeah, and a really good example of that was at a team event a week ago, and one of my players took Mental Interrogate against Harlequins, and the Harlequin player said, "Fine, I'm just going to keep my characters in boats all game long, and you're going to score 3 on that." I don't like. I could bring my characters out and do something with them, but because this is a team
Why?
event, differential matters. I'm just not going to. I'm going to score my deadly performance, going to score my behind enemy lines, and my Shadow Seers are just not going to do anything all game.
I mean, you just rope a dope too with the Troop Master, right? You just go out, pay a CP, and then you briefly give your opponent that I'm going to score Psychic Interrogate the next turn, and then you pay a CP and just retreat him back into a boat, and then they're like, "No, I don't get to do any Psychic."
You have to be really careful about that against like Tyranids, though, because that Zoanthrope will blow your boat apart, and then you will get psychically interrogated by someone else.
Somebody will remember that they can, in fact, choose the order of operations in their psychic phase and use his own unit to just pop it full of holes before interrogating.
the biggest tips I give to newer players is that remembering your order of operations for most things is super important. And just because you paid for 6 inches of movement does not mean you have to use all 6 to go straight ahead. If people would remember those two things more often, they would have a much easier time in the game in general. The amount of times that people are like, bro, I move 8 straight ahead. I'm like, that was probably a little strong.
So that's also something that I've seen the most. And I'm not like the most skilled player. I think I'm at Cliff's, like me and Cliff are at the same level of play, basically, to be totally honest. And what I've okay, Cliff, you be nice to me. That's nice. I like the ego inflation. But
Is that inflation or self-deprecation?
I don't know.
Let them call him A, let them call him B.
A little bit of both. It's both. Is that you always have to tell people, especially new players, like not to just run forward. They don't have to run forwards. Like they don't have to just move straight at people. And then like the next lesson is you don't have to move 20 inches. Like you don't have to. You can move 20 inches, but don't just move 20 inches because you can move it. And that was the example that I gave one person who moved a Farseer like all the way towards me, and then I used a Tyrannifex to melt it off the board. And I was like, you didn't have to move that all the way forwards. It just wasn't a thing that you needed to do because all you did was put something in a position to die.
Yep. You'll get a good chuckle out of this. Francois, who won Capital City Bloodbath and plays on teams with me, his last 4 tournament games against Necrons, every single one has been against the pre-game move Necron faction. You want to guess what they did turn every single time, whether they went first or second?
Right towards people.
Pre-game moved towards the Tyranid player, who then advanced and charged a 9-man brick. 3 times he scored behind enemy lines, turn 1 with a 9-man warrior brick.
Oh,
because he would
behind enemy lines against Necrons?
Oh yeah, because he just vibes in their deployment zone.
To be fair, you do kind of have to vibe in their deployment zone no matter what. Kind of got to get there.
Yeah, you're not going to deny that herd prey or that what's it called purge point that they get for you not being in their deployment zone.
Man,
I mean, I get it. Like, I understand, like
PTSD.
I understand the plan there. I will always forever rank Necrons, I think, higher than other people, just because every game in Necrons feels like a desperate struggle in my brain. And as I had to explain to one Necron player, is that I have to work twice as hard as you to make sure that I don't die immediately. Like, I won a game against a Necron player only because a freaking Harpy mortal wounded the Silent King to death on the last turn, the last movement phase, the last charge phase of the game.
That counts.
And like, it counts. But it was like, at the end of the game, my opponent was like, oh man, that felt terrible. I was like, for you? Like, I had to bank on that Harpy rolling a 6 or on that freaking thing to kill him. I don't know what you're talking about, but definitely that pregame move does not have to be moved to go forwards. You can move it backwards. You can move your stuff around in your deployment zone. Like, movement is in all directions, folks, unless the rulebook tells you otherwise.
It's true. Yeah, I have a scarab-shaped scar, like on the back of my neck, from that game at WTC.
From the Hackett.
Yeah, from this fucking... Is this the back? Is this the front? That's the front.
That's the front.
This bastard. Ugh. Fucking, come on. Check out. There we go.
And I guess while we have...
You get the idea.
While we have Dashboard Dad himself on the stream, do you want to talk about the dashboard a little bit and like what you've got planned next for it, or kind of what you are doing with it right now?
Yeah, so there's a couple like sort of new tweaks we're putting in place, and then something I'm working on that I hope to get done by like the end of this month. The new tweaks behind the scenes are like the ability to filter in a more discrete way for player experience, because we took a look at the distribution of players, the number of events they've attended, and there are a lot of players that have been to one. Like, most players have been to one out of the 9,000 or so that we've got information for. A decent number have been to 2. And then you start running into like a few hundred have been to 3, and then you start running into a scenario where anyone who's been to 4 or more fits into this like very clean sort of 600-ish player group. And those 600 players are absolutely feasting on the people that are showing up for the first time. And so it makes sense to sort of like separate out and disaggregate the performance of all of these different tiers of players from one another to get a better sense of like, if I'm showing up to a tournament for the first time and I want a reasonable chance against someone that is also showing up to a tournament for the first time, like what should I be interested in bringing? What if I have multiple options? What if I want to go like 3-2? Let's see what happens. I think it also really drives home the idea that like, and it's going to be the subject of a pretty long blog post, that most people going to GTs, if you are like me, your mindset going should not be, I'm going to leave this GT 4-1, crushing it, because I'm an excellent player in my garage / backyard / bedroom / office when I'm playing with my friends. Like I should expect to show up and like maybe win a couple games and be really excited about that, and try to use it as a learning experience. And if you're looking to win a GT, you're really going to need a lot more practice, just at like the event of going to an event. So it's going to take a while. The bigger thing that we're working on is this like very large scale at a glance faction health tab on the dashboard, which will in one screen give you overall win rate, disaggregated win rates for differential experience levels for folks, the overrepresentation for a given faction, the record distribution for that faction. So like how many players at a 5-round event go 0-5, 4 or 1-4, 2-3, 3-2, et cetera, to suss out like what are the odds that somebody goes positive, and then also give us a sense of like sort of skill gaps, because there are quite a few factions with say 52 to 55% win rates, but very few of those wins include folks that have gone 4-1 or 5-0 at an event, and they include a ton of people who've gone 3-2. So that would tell us like, oh, cool, this faction's like very relatively high floor for performance, but like also requires a relatively high degree of skill to pilot with effectiveness. And the inverse would be true also.
When you look at the dashboard right now, it's like Necrons have like a 13% win differential or something like that.
Yeah.
Currently between people who've been to more events as compared to those who are at their first event, right?
Yeah.
So you do have those like really big spreads for some factions between experienced and inexperienced players.
Yep. So hopefully, I mean, so now we're down under today. Adam had the Falcon on, and as always, as he has been for the past few years, Falcon kept trying to drive home big hearts. Yeah, big hearts for both those guys. Falcon tried driving home the idea that win rates really aren't everything. It's just not. It's not the be all end all, despite the fact that it's like so prominently displayed on our dashboard. Even we don't really take it seriously as an individual separate statistic, as much as it is a starting point for us to start poking around and asking more questions. And that's why we care about the like player skill. That's why we care about faction matchups. That's why we care about things like overall points scored, all that good stuff. So yeah, hopefully by the end of the month we'll have something good going on. Hopefully have a blog post with that sort of analysis, reassuring new / bad players like me that we're not quite as bad as we think we are, but also are in fact a little bit worse than we think we are at the same time.
Cliff quickly becoming also the most infamous blogger on the website, the most infamous Reddit component of this show.
Woo! Some of those, man, the Reddit hot takes coming after that post were incredible. Like, I would kill for the opponents that some of these guys apparently have, where they're going to show up with Votan and get spanked, apparently.
Yeah, that much good, consistent practice, man.
Tim, you know dad life, man. Work, kids, dinner. You know the vibe. I got you.
Do we want to transition into questions then? We can take some questions. We can have Cliff on to answer questions with us as well. And then if anybody has dashboard specific questions, now is the time to ask it. Because this is one of the few times where we get to have Cliff on the main show to answer questions about the dashboard.
Or if you just have like Cliff questions in general, Like just anything about Cliff that you'd like to know. Now would be the time to ask.
This can be a get to know Cliff segment as well.
Cliff AMA.
Yeah, Cliff AMA.
Yeah, there you go.
Love it. All right. Shall we launch into questions then?
Yeah,
Yep.
let's do it.
Bring
Let's
it.
launch
I
into
got
questions.
since we don't have our Innis today. At Vince and Dr. Stats Daddy. So with the Votan nerfs, how are they placed in the meta? Are we still terrified or is there hope?
I think they're still a
Um,
solid A tier faction. Like they're probably still an S tier faction, to be totally honest, but it's gonna
Yeah.
I don't know what Anthony's opinion on this is, aside from the fact that once we hit the end of October and the full line is out, we'll probably get the real Votan experience. And the real Votan experience is probably an S tier faction.
Yeah. So they're still criminally fucked. Like it's not as bad. Like I won't lose now to someone playing their first tournament like 7 out of 10 times, which is cool. But it's still not good. Like the problem is we exist in this wonderful state right now where there are other fairly busted shit around, right? There's Bile, there's Necrons, there's Tau, there's this, and there's that. And when the Dataslate eventually, I'm told, comes and punches those dudes in the nuts and lowers their level as well, Votan just goes like, oh, I'm the, I'd probably still put them in the top 3 armies in the game. They just go back to being the best, so it doesn't matter. Like, it's fine. It's better. You can, like, it is physically possible for you to lose a non-mirror game with them now, which is more than I would have been willing to say before this. But it's not done yet. Like, they definitely are still insane. You definitely should still be worried. Yeah, not ideal, but better, and I'll take better. I feel like I can play something approximating a game of 40k against them. I don't feel like I'm playing 40k and they're playing Apocalypse. So,
Anthony, what would you say your odds are against an equally skilled player playing Votan?
If I'm playing Emperor's Children and they're playing like the Ymir Beam list,
Yeah.
with like a bunch of Zerkers, I don't know, like 25%.
Cool, man.
If that, like, yeah, it's really unfavored. Like, it's not good. Like, really good shooting backed up by the best melee unit in the game is just pretty powerful when I don't have super great secondaries and theirs are better than mine. So yeah, that part is rough, but they have less shit. Like, I don't just lose for free now. Like, before you, like, I wasn't joking before when I said, like, there was like, if I took Ymir Beams to a tournament, there's a 0% chance I lose a non-mirror game. It wouldn't have happened. I would have dropped 0 non-mirror games as pre-nerf Votan. It wouldn't have, there was no world. Whereas now, like, you can maybe lose to Tau, or you can maybe lose to, like, really well-piloted other stuff. But if you're on the level, like if I were to play, like, an equally skilled player, playing them, like, with the knowledge in their mind that their secondaries are kill you based and not sit in your deployment zone based, you have very little chance of them not just steamrolling you when they decide to. The thing is that they're in the pilot seat, they control the tempo the whole time because their offense and defense is better than yours, and they're fast enough to put that on you. So you can't ever really be like, I'm going to be fine. Because if you both stare at each other, you might beat Votan. If the Votan player gets, like, confused about how the game works, you got a chance. Like,
so what you're saying is
they
we should get them drunk during the game, like real dwarves.
Or just sign them up for some coaching with people that want to play passively, and then maybe you'll get there. But if they don't do that, then if they go and hit you, you're fucked.
So, but Anthony, I hear that Votan are slow.
They're slow if you don't try to leave your
We've done
deployment
this.
zone.
Let's not.
Sorry, I was literally just trying to make Anthony upset live on air because I know that it's possible by saying that they're slow and short range and they'll never get anywhere. I don't know what you're talking about, Anthony. It's
true if you don't try to get anywhere.
It's true.
All right, we do have some more interesting questions. So I think, Votan's still an issue, but they're beatable now. And we're now seeing that with our internal testing as well. So with the number of dominant melee builds going up in the meta, Creations, Emperor's Children, even Yanari to an extent, what would you advise players to do to adapt? Is it simply changing game philosophy to a psychic shooting-based approach, if and where possible?
I wouldn't describe Emperor's Children as a melee army. They're definitely way more on the combined arms front. Like, they're not the best melee army.
I'd agree with that,
right?
because
melee...
Your list is what? 4 Blastmasters in it? 5 Blastmasters in it?
Mine has 3, but I'm built to play on GW terrain. Vix had 5, and Alex had 4. Like, there's a good amount of shooting. The Venom Crawlers, the Terminators, like, there's a lot of shooting in that list. And when you play against something like Bile, a lot of what you're doing is shooting. So it's not it does the in-between thing where, like, if you're a shooting army, it'll come really fast at you and punch you. If you're like a slower melee army, it just hangs back a little bit and shoots you, and then eventually goes in later. But Bile, however, should not be taking any guns. That's a melee army, and that is a real thing. But most of the better armies in the game that I interact with aren't super melee based. They just have strong melee components, right? Like, I would never call Tyranids a melee army. They have great shooting. They're awesome in the psychic phase. They dump out mortals out of phase with spore mines. Like, it's not a melee army.
They're a combined arms army. And then if you look at, I guess, a good example of an army that's top in the meta is Sisters. And Sisters is a more of a melee army than a shooting army, because you usually have, at most 2 Retributor units.
But, like, those Retributor units are super important and do a huge amount of damage.
True, and if you don't play them well, then you usually will lose your game pretty handily. Those are very important units. So again, combine arms. Okay, exactly. I see what you're saying with that.
I think people just...
the only one that wouldn't be like that, and most Harlequin lists are more shooty than punchy these days.
I think that's because Harlequins... I think it's because Harlequins move fast. Like, people use combat to move. Like, you're not using melee just to kill things. You're using melee to move your force onto somebody else's force. And movement is the most important aspect of the game. So you need to charge to take things. Like, you can't just let your opponent sit on a primary point all game collecting points. And the Harlequins do that by advancing 22 inches around the board and then shooting you to death.
Still unaddressed. Cool times.
Yeah.
Totally dead faction, Cliff. I don't know what you're talking about.
We nerfed it. We handled it. Light is dead.
So Curie can actually attest to this. From the minute I played Harlequins, I was like, oh, the broken part is the advance and shoot. And, like, every single patch, I'm like, they did the wrong thing again. And someone... Curie will watch me have this argument, 4 times now? We'll be like, no, the part's the transhuman. No, it's the luck dice. No, it's the whatever. And I'm like, no.
It's the fact that I can move 22 inches and shoot a 6-inch gun.
Yeah.
If I could only move 16 inches, that's a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So Harlequins are already so much faster than you. And every single inch that you give them over top of that is like an exponential gain of how much better they are than you. It's really, really wild. Also, that light strat's fucking bullshit.
Yeah, but this is a question for Anthony. An interview on Discord had things like Death Guard with -1 damage and decent fight last control as a counter to Emperor's Children. Even though they're slow as shit, can they pose a problem?
No.
I feel like
I would have. Go ahead. What are you gonna say, Nathan?
No, I feel like Jeremy added a word in there. That's all.
No, I didn't.
It does slow as shit. I thought I didn't see that there, so I was like, man, Jeremy,
word for word,
have an opinion.
Yeah. I would have to suffer like a medical incident, I think, to lose to Death Guard. Like I don't think there's ever a world where Emperor's Children piloted appropriately loses to Death Guard. They're so much slower than you. Like, I don't even understand what like series of events could lead to me getting like actually fight lasted by them. Because, like, all right, for those of you who don't understand, and this is like an important clarification for this, the way the Foul Blight spawn works is you got a 6-inch aura that says you didn't charge, you don't fight first. But that's the end of the text. Like, that stops there. And if you fight last them, they go in bracket 3, you go in bracket 2, and you just punch them in the face with everything before they swing at all. If you, as the Emperor's Children player, disgrace your legion by getting within 3 inches of that guy, you then also get fought lasted, which is really bad because then you end up in the bottom bracket. That said, even then, you still get 1 activation before they get to go. And if you somehow engineered a situation where you charged that, like you got to pick where you charged, got fault lasted, or sorry, got stench vatsed, then got fault lasted, and your 1 activation wasn't enough, you deserve to lose that game. Like, Emperor's Children will only get you so far. This isn't an Emperor's Children problem. That's a piloting issue. All of the power in the world is not going to save you from that level of throwing, except Creation's Bile. So, yeah.
Because you'll fight no matter what.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. You can charge them straight in. You can charge the Blight Spawn, like base to base. Doesn't matter. Who cares? Like, it's just a little dude with 3-inch bubble of marginal punishment. Ridiculous.
Thanks, Naj. Yeah, I had to ask the question because it's in their Discord, but that was my thought on it. Bit of background, I actually watched Anthony play a local Death Guard player who's quite skilled, quite good with the faction at Salt City
really
GT. It was a good game, but you put him in the ground.
Yeah, he never left his deployment zone, and I beat him by like 60.
Stats Papa, this is actually a question for the 3 of us stats guys. With CSM being so popular, would you ever consider breaking them apart for stats purposes, similar to how certain Space Marine factions are? The answer is that we already do in the dashboard. You can look at sub factions when you click on Chaos Space Marines, and it will show it. The reality is that they don't have their own books, with the exception, obviously, Tethons and Death Guard do, but they're their own thing. They aren't CSM. It's just more of it's just the way things are, and for Space Marines, we lump them together for almost all of our analyses, only really breaking them out if there's a really unique army that's been doing particularly well, like Blood Angels.
Yeah, the only reason those guys are separate on the dashboard is because they have different books, and because it's funny to see how badly Imperial Fists are doing.
That's fair.
And Crimson Fists, of course.
If it was up to me, we would not split Space Marines up into their individual factions because I hate it. But it's not just up to me because I'm not a monarch. This is an equal footing team of people who make stats decisions. And it makes sense with the situation being what it currently is with books and supplements and stuff like that, for the Space Marine factions to have their own individual things until they all get shoved into the same book and they no longer have supplements, and then they'll all be under one thing. So
they all
play
so differently that I think it's fair. I have no interest in playing like any form of Space Marines, but man, I fucking love Blood Angels. And I could be convinced to play like White Scars or Iron Hands. Maybe if Space Marines get a new book, I'll be interested in a new faction because gameplay mechanics are more important than lore. And I don't care what anyone tells you. But I don't. Like right now, it's not really a thing. Oh, we got a Tiny Cliff.
Guest star.
We got Tiny Cliff.
One second, Tiny Cliff.
I'm actually gonna, Tim. I have seen your question, but I have a feeling that this is actually like an entire bonus episode with Anthony and Typhus that would go over really well. Australia versus the world. What team of 8 would you pick to take on the champs?
Ooh.
I think that's a discussion you and Typhus should have on one of your little side shows
about that.
Because I think that would be a very interesting fantasy draft of the best players in the world outside of Australia.
To try to take down the 8 that won. It's legitimately difficult, by the way.
Yeah. Oh no, it would be. But I think that'd be a fascinating discussion, and much longer discussion. This is actually a really interesting question from Brendan. Have you seen the AOS MetaWatch article and video? What do you think of them? Does that sort of approach seem like a good idea? Are there any concerns you have about their approach or data collection? And then, is the 40 to 60% range good enough for 40K, or should it be tighter because it has more rules and is more granular than AOS?
40 to 60% is such a cop-out. Like, holy shit.
Well, and the thing is that in the AOS MetaWatch article, they actually said that their target for AOS is 45 to 55.
Yeah, I mean, so first that was awesome. Like, kudos to Games Workshop for producing a like real example of like, hey, here's some like actual data analysis we're doing behind the scenes. Awesome. Definitely hijacked from what Honest Wargamer and crew are doing.
Oh,
but like,
100%. I mean, they probably cribbed the notes from Honest Wargamer and then used them.
Yeah. But like, good on them for stealing the notes from like people that are doing really good stats work. Like, they've got great shit going on. The difference between a 60% win rate faction and a 40% win rate faction, your odds of like going and doing well at a tournament are so vastly different that like you can't. That's like if your game state is out of control and you're just trying to like get it back in line, that's a great place to start. But it really should not take professional game designers very long, despite the level of complexity inherent to the game, to start narrowing that in. I think we're already seeing that right in 40K. Like, we've seen win rates for the majority of like non-Astartes / Harlequins / Tyranid factions come into this like 55 to 45 zone, which is great, right? Like, that's like net good for the game. And it tells you you've got a little bit of work to do here and some baseline work to do with like the Space Marine book. But like, man, you can't be happy with that sort of distribution. No. That's crazy.
And you shouldn't be, because it means that you have players, especially in that 40 to 45 bracket, that are just going to give up.
Yeah.
I think you can have a couple factions on both ends, and that's kind of it, though.
Right.
Like, you can't have, and if they're low representation factions, then that's, I think, also okay for the general health of the game. Like, Harlequins were at a 60% win rate back in 8th when they or early 9th when they totaled Marine factions, and that was kind of all they did for a while. And I think those kind of fringe situations are okay, but that requires a level of statistical knowledge of the game state beyond just win rate, right?
Yeah.
You need to know the inner pieces of your game and how they're working, and you need to look past win rate. So I think the key thing to look at is like 40 to 60 might be okay if the context within the 40 to 60 isn't awful for people's game experiences. Like, maybe that 40% win rate faction just requires like, maybe there's like a 55% win rate version of that list currently in existence, like what you see kind of with Necrons right now, where Necrons,
GSC.
Yes, or Deathwatch, yeah, GSC or like Necrons, where you have like a 13 to 15% differential between experienced and inexperienced players. Like, those are the weird kind of situations where I think 40 to 60 is appropriate, but 45 to 55 is ideal, in like my opinion. But I also agree with Glyph that you have to say that. You can't be like 40 to 60 is great, because that's not true if you don't explain why 40 to 60 is great. Otherwise, it is a cop-out. Like, you should also, GW, you're a huge company. Shouldn't you aim higher and be like, yeah, 45 to 55? Like, maybe promise a little bit more. I also think AOS has a centralizing factor.
Yeah.
Of the double turn, which helps with balancing their game.
Some thoughts.
It's a good goal.
So
how you come about that?
Sure.
Yeah. Also, like, I don't think Games Workshop put out in an official channel that they're okay with 40 to 60 as their win rate for 40K. I think that was a.
They have not said.
I think that was taken
that.
from
That was...
I think it was taken from a private stream. So like broadly, that's not great. But also, like, there are things like Harlequins where in a given weekend, if 4 pilots go on a good run, the faction has a 65% win rate. Like, what are we gonna do about that? I don't know, man. Like, you can tell those 4 people to suck more so they don't get the whole faction nerfed. Like, I don't know. It seems it's like a rough spot to be in, right? Like,
which is why looking at the bigger picture for like a good example is we have 10,000 games of Nephilim played now, something close to that.
Right.
So if 500 of those are Harlequin games, that's probably a big enough sample to start drawing conclusions from. But if it's 40 games of Harlequins, it's probably not enough. And just to reiterate, for anyone who hasn't read the MetaWatch article, I recommend you go and read it, because it's actually a very well written and very good overview of GW's balance guidelines for how they want to balance AOS. I wish that they would do the same for 40K, or maybe they are, and we're going to see that with the next data slate where they'll publish that as well.
I feel
I
like
was-
AOS gets all of the best things though. They get the best model sculpts.
Except
They get
game.
the best. Yeah, they don't get the best game, so they get
Yeah.
everything else best.
But so their goals were number one, external balance. Average win rates should be 45 to 55%. The idea basically being a 5% margin of error about the 50% threshold. And they actually look at both battle tomes and sub-factions, which is huge. The idea that you're looking at both of those things is quite significant. Then their next goal is on internal balance. They want the majority of the war scrolls or the data sheets in each battle tome to be used in more than 5% of competitive lists, which basically means that, like, you look at the Space Marine line, that's never going to happen. But say you look at, I don't know, the Craft Worlds line, and you want to see 60% of the data sheets showing up in more than 5% of the lists. That's quite the goal. And that basically is looking for internal balance within the book. You know, the words that are often thrown about when a book is really broken is that, oh, it has amazing internal balance because you can choose anything from there and it do really well with it. Yeah, great internal balance, terrible external balance.
Yeah.
And then the last one is
Drukhari.
it was very true for Drukhari, which is why we spent a year playing whack-a-mole with that army. And then the last one, this one doesn't apply to 40K because we don't really have these. They want universal options, which are like things like endless spells to be used in less than 10% of army rosters. And so we don't really have anything equivalent to that in 40K that I can think of. Maybe they target soup, but I don't think that's something
like
that's
Imperial
really viable
agent
to
shit.
target.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe they do that. Maybe they look at Agents of Chaos, Agents of the Imperium, and traveling players, basically saying we don't want to see these in more than 10% of the respective lists.
Yeah.
And yes, Archon Rahal has a really good point that AOS has far fewer data sheets per book, so it's easier to achieve that 60% threshold.
Yeah.
With Craft World, Space Marines, CSM, it's a lot harder to achieve that. So that's the kind of the third goal, and then I think if those first two goals were achieved for 40K, we would be in a utopia. Like, to be able to pull lists and look at them and have that level of list diversity as well as that level of faction diversity at the top tables. Because right now we do actually have really good faction diversity at the top tables. But when you drill it down, each one of those lists looks very similar to each other from the respective factions.
And that's a data sheet number problem probably for a lot of factions.
Yeah.
Like Space Marines is the biggest example. There's like over 100 data sheets in that faction. And it's impossible for all of them to see play at that level, even with a faction that has 15% or more meta representation, right? Like, you're just never going to see Scorpius Varietal number 3 with the Plasma Omega Destructor on it. Like, it's just not going to happen.
I'll do it. I'll run it.
To Deathwatch, when you win
Cliff will run
Deathwatch Best in Faction next year, you'll bring the.
I'm serious about that. Only because I think it's such low hanging fruit.
I mean, we should definitely have a setting goals episode at the start of the next ITC season and see how we do.
Hell yeah.
We'll do that after LVO rolls, like after we get back. That'll be our episode.
Oh God,
because we won't have stats to talk about. We'll be like, LVO is a party. Here's some fucking goals.
It'll be the LVO debrief.
We've learned.
It'll be the LVO debrief because I
So-
think all of us are planning to be there.
Yeah. So I thought it was really interesting about that AOS thing real quick before we move on. One of the factions I think is the coolest in that game is Beast Chaos, which is essentially Minotaurs and Dragon Ogres. And they took them from being complete shit and took a mechanic that definitely shouldn't exist in that game, which is army-wide like Mega Rend that gets even better, and just jammed it on them and it made them work, which is amazing.
Didn't
Like-
they do it in a White Dwarf article too? They like took a White
Yeah,
Dwarf article. They're
fuck
like,
yeah.
"Here's a fix."
Love
It's literally
they were-
the guy slapping duct tape on a leak in that container meme,
Dude,
basically.
It's amazing. Like, actually hilarious. I Dude, it'd be like if they put out a white dwarf next week and it just gave guard judgment tokens. If they were just like, fuck it, bam.
Can you imagine though? Yeah, this is the number of the Emperor is mad at you tokens.
Yeah.
Each one improves AP by 1 on all of your guns and gives rerolls.
Vengeance tokens, bro. Come on.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Tom Layton put it perfectly. Imagine giving an army faction-wide additional 2 points of AP.
Imperial Fist skyrocket.
Sure.
No.
Imperial Fist get AP2 bolter base, and then they add 2.
Please
so
no.
Doctrine gives them another one. Like, just
Big
let's
sauce.
go.
It stacks to AP4 on their heavy bolters just immediately.
Floating 6s, ignore cover. Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, we've talked about
Let's
this before,
do it.
so I'm going to skip
Yeah,
the
they
Dataslate
recovered.
questions.
Sam, I don't know who New Rollins is, but if he's going for it, he's probably going to win.
We should probably just take a couple more questions.
Yeah, I've got 2 more that I wanted us to go through. This one's just a real quick one. Anthony, how much higher does the Drukhari win rate have to go for you to bounce back to them?
If they put core back on paint engines, I would think about it. And unnerved artists.
If they put core back on paint engines and unnerf artists, I will hold you to that.
I would do it. I would unbox
it.
my painted Drukhari army immediately. If they just did half of that, if they just took core and put it back on paint engines, I would unbox that shit from my closet and I would play it at the very next GT event in my area immediately.
Just core is not enough. But if they do both, I'll definitely give them a shot.
I'll do it if they just get them core. I'll do it. I'll be right back to bringing paint engines to everything. I will be so happy. I know. I just love that army so much. I just want it to be paint engine focused.
You don't got to tell me, dude.
Look, I am a homunculus in real life. I want to be homunculus on the table too.
Fair.
All right. This is actually probably 2 kind of good questions to ride out on. For a newish player, is it best to ride one army through meta fluctuations or switch it up? I'm gonna expand on it a little bit. Let's just assume that you don't have to worry about spending money on armies.
Sure.
Because that can be a barrier for a lot of people.
Yeah. It depends on how often you're looking at meta rerolling and where you start. If you start strong, like on a strong faction, then like ride it for a while. But if it gets fucking murdered, then switch. Like when you're early in your development cycle, it's important to know when you're fucking up versus when your list is scamming you. So like net listing is really important early. Playing a strong faction is really important early, and you can dial down. You shouldn't, but you can dial down your faction strength portion of that choice the more experience you get. Like, I don't think Emperor's Children is the best army in the game, but it very fucking clearly can still compete all the way to the top when piloted well. So I play Emperor's Children because it makes me the most happy. But I'm far enough along in the development cycle to know like when I'm fucking up versus when my army's fucking up. And that's really important when you're new.
Yeah, I think I can actually speak to that. A really good example of that is there was a period of time this year where I was playing Dark Angels and I kept hitting a wall in terms of my performance. And I realized by about the 3rd GT with them that it was the army that was the problem, because I just could not convert that into, I was going X and 1, X and 2 at events, and I couldn't convert that into podiums or undefeateds. I picked up Knights and immediately finished 2nd at a 120 person major. Yep. So it's just like that kind of thing. It can be difficult to recognize it because I've been playing for years now, but it can be difficult to recognize that as a young player, as an earlier or newish player, and that's where you sometimes want to turn to the community and say, "Hey, I'm playing Imperial Fist and I can't go better than 3 and 2." Well, if you're going 3 and 2 as Imperial Fist, you're probably a pretty good player.
You're killing it, yeah.
Crushing it. You're the hero they deserve. That's a 60%.
In which case, if you
win
take
rate,
off those training
awesome.
wheels and pick up Tyranids, Harlequins, Sisters, Emperor's Children, some other army that's sitting in the upper half, you're going to find yourself doing a lot better. But it's difficult to just say that whether you ride or switch without knowing what faction you're playing currently.
Also, definitely don't play Imperial Fists, go 3-2, and then play someone playing a stronger faction and whine the entire time about how you would beat them if you were playing a stronger faction. Just nut up and do it then.
But yeah, like switching factions is like, some people think that switching factions a lot is like a bad thing. It just depends on what you want to do and how you want to play the game. Like, switch your faction as much as you're comfortable with, but also realize like why you're making that decision, and like that there's a learning curve every time you switch a faction to catch up to speed to it.
Yep.
Yeah. And then the last question, and this is something that's come up a few times, but I don't think we've ever identified it. Does playing casual 40K, Crusade, doubles, anything not competitive, make your competitive game better, worse, or not have an effect?
I'll answer this last. I want to see what you guys have to say.
I'm of two minds on this. I play, leading up to the WTC, before I took a break from this, I would play every single week at my local club. And I would always bring, for the most part, either my Dark Angels or a slightly silly off-meta list, because I wanted to teach people. I wanted to, so I would intentionally handicap myself. I would still play to win, but there would be some goal affiliated with playing more casually, and it would either be improving the local players, making them better, or seeing if I could win against someone's net list with something silly like guard. And to do that, it was always a goal of focusing on things that I knew I needed to improve on, that playing meta factions were more forgiving on. So things like fight face sequencing, making sure that you use your movement correctly, even making sure that you're doing target priority, because sometimes you're not going to kill what you want to go into, that kind of thing. So that's my position on it. I don't necessarily feel that it made me a better player, but it made my meta better, which then meant that I would get more challenging games at the actual tournaments, which would then improve me. But playing casually in of itself, I don't feel improves me.
I think you can use casual play to like improve your game, but it requires you to like actively think about doing that when you're doing it. Like in some Crusade games, I would practice like combat movement stuff and things like that, like in those games. So it wasn't about list construction, but it would be like, okay, during this Crusade game, because I'm playing a game, I'm going to test some kind of close combat phase thing. Like, let's try charging into heroic intervention range and then piling out of combat so I can see what that looks like when you do it. And maybe that's not something you do purposefully, right? In that setting, but like just playing the game can improve like the way that you do it. But Crusade and some narrative versions of the game have like a bunch of extra stuff in them that can distract you from how things perform in game. Like at a certain point in Crusade, I had a winged hive tyrant that ignored invulnerable saves. That's just not the way that life works, guys. When I watched that night one phase of Megara, when I watched that winged hive tyrant charge in one phase a Knight Megara from full health to 0 health, I was like, that probably doesn't happen in real life, but it was real funny to watch him do it right now. Like if you go into games to practice things, like then you'll get more out of it, because more games is more reps is more practice. But like otherwise, there's like all this extra stuff in narrative that can distract you from improving, I think, in competitive. Mm-hmm. Unless you use the goals from Crusade Leagues to like get hobbying done, in which case it can only help but improve you by giving you those 10 extra points of hobby points.
I'm going to interpret this slightly differently in that I don't really play Crusade, but I play lots of what I would say is casual competitive games, which is like I will show up with a borderline okay list because I like the models in it, because that's my primary approach to the game, like 3 monoliths, like termite drills in a Death Watch force. And just to see, like, is this unit actually as dog shit as the internet broadly thinks it is? And 2, because I like the models and I want to see what I can do with them. And that my competitive context is such that like I can do that and have a good game, and also be walking someone through potential mistakes they're making, which in turn helps me think more more carefully about the steps that I'm taking. Because even though I'm taking these units that I'm like mean thinking these are stronger than you think, I'm like, they're actually not that good. I need to like do this appropriately if I actually want to try and win this game. So I find it useful.
That makes sense.
Makes sense. So and this will come as zero shock to people that know me well, but I am to borrow a portion of a Bruce Lee quote, I am a one kick 10,000 times type of person. So when I practice stuff, it is deep in the repetition tank. I play stuff a lot over and over and over and over and over and over again. Like if I was gonna play like 1,000 point, like I probably just wouldn't play 1,000 point game, right? Like that's not like a thing that I'm gonna like use free time on. I'll probably just play Total War if I want to like fuck about. 40k to me is in many ways like my personal replacement for the martial arts I'm not currently doing. So like when I'm training for like a boxing fight, right? I don't do like sparring rounds where I have one glove on. Like that's not a real thing. You would never do that because it doesn't make sense. Like Cliff doesn't try to play basketball with his feet when he's like bored. Like that's not like a really good way to develop some skill that he's missing. So like, yeah, look, like even the idea is making him laugh. He's like, what the fuck? You would never do that. Like it's just ridiculous. So like not that those games are any less legitimate ways to play if you want to just try and enjoy the game, but I don't see a whole lot of value in them as like a competitive outlet past actually what Nathan was saying about them upping your hobby goals. As someone that doesn't really interface with that side of the hobby, I could see that being important, and it's probably very difficult to keep motivation on the hobby side of things when you're trying to grind games for the competitive side of the game. So yeah, that's my stat.
That makes sense. I also think like it's important to recognize that not all of your hobby has to feed the other part of the hobby. Like if you enjoy Crusade and casual games, like just go and enjoy the casual Crusade games and enjoy it for like storytelling and hobby and stuff like that. And that it is an equally valid way to enjoy the game as compared to say like tournament re-racking 100 times to practice to school, like see what secondaries work or to break a faction, right?
Right. Yeah,
definitely.
There's 1,000 ways you can do this.
Yeah, like I whenever my store does Crusade Leagues, I always play in them because I just enjoy it. It's fun. I'll play I'll play the models that I haven't been painting because it gives me a reason to paint them. But it's also one of these things where at the end of the day, if I'm given the choice between playing a Crusade game and playing a 2K GT game, I'm going to play the 2K GT game.
Right. I also think like don't feed into the like online. There's been a lot of competitive versus narrative clashing as of late. Just don't feed into that. Let everybody enjoy the game the way that they want to, and don't treat anybody as less or more because they do something different than you do or do the same thing that you do.
Yeah, we're all playing with toys, guys.
Mm-hmm. At the end of the day, like, yeah, all right. It's just we're painting tiny people and having them kill each other and using dice to represent it. You're not making tank noises occasionally while driving your tanks around the battle. Are you?
If you're not doing it.
True. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was misunderstood that. I thought you were shaming me for doing it, and I was getting upset just deep inside.
Do we want, like when I play Amber's Children, my pupils actually take over my entire eye like a Slanesh Marine. So I understand. Yeah.
Anthony, you get like anime eyes. Your eyes get like really big.
I get really excited when that advance in charge prayer is successful.
I guess we can take like another question or two if we have them.
Yeah, we've got a few more. I skipped over a couple. There were some that were in chat actually that I think we want to identify.
Oh, we should do that. Yeah, definitely.
Chat.
Actually,
this is a fun one. Well, the other ones. Cliff, what is your basketball experience?
Oh, from Sam. this is a long time ago. So I'm 39. When I was a pretty good high school basketball player and like a pretty good AAU basketball player. AAU is Amateur Athletic Union. It's like the pre-pro track circuit for athletes in baseball, basketball, and football here in the United States. I got like soft recruited to UMich to play ball, but that would have been me riding the bench until like my 4th year. But like, what's like an example? Yeah, I don't know. I'm like, I was at a level where I was good enough to know like if I step into a random court, I'm likely the best player there. But also at the level where I could see the people that were truly good, and it was like, and play with them, and it was fucking humbling because you have like, I'm 6'4", I weigh like 230 pounds, and I'd be playing against somebody who's like 6'10", in my position, 6'10", 260, who's faster and quicker and can jump higher with a better shot. And I was just like, okay, I just
like,
don't.
what the fuck?
I understand, like, oh yeah, because you're going to go to Duke next year and start, and then go to the league the year after, and like that'll be cool. And like maybe if I take this seriously for 4 years, I'll go to Brazil and play professional ball for 2, and then quit and like go to business school. Like that was a path that many of my friends took. So it is like it was actually really good because I got a lot of it was like very humility building, but also allowed me to like have a realistic sense of how good I am at a thing in like much broader aspects of my life.
Yeah. I had a pretty similar MMA experience because I trained out of Sarah Longo's gym for a little bit, and that gym has produced 3 UFC champions. So you like, you fuck around a little bit and you find out a whole bunch. Like, it's really good to be like, oh, I'm not that good at this. Cool. Like, Gen Pop? Yeah, that's fine. But like these dudes, different animal entirely.
100%.
Yeah, pros are pros for a reason, man. They're so good.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't expect to show up to a GT when I go and like win games against people that have been doing this shit for like 10 straight years, day in and day out, taking it really seriously, doing the planning, doing the practice. Like that would just be like your level of cockiness / arrogance would have to be sky high to come out of that being like, man, I didn't beat Anthony in my first time ever in an event. Like what are we doing?
For my hot take, the old heads who've been playing for 10 years are much worse than the people that started just before COVID.
Oh no. Interesting.
A lot of them are getting shown up these days by people who came out of what would be considered nowhere, outlets, but really came out of COVID or other competitive outlets.
Yeah. That makes sense.
I just want to say that I always forget that Cliff is older than me. I felt like I had the old man status, and I just remembered that Cliff is actually the old man. I just look like the old man. Because science has steadily ruined me. That's just what that is, though.
Yeah.
All right. I do have, if we have time for one more question, I do have one more really interesting question that we skipped over because I thought they would actually be a really good one to handle later. But that one guy, John, asks, for all, how do you learn this positioning thing folks keep describing? What should I focus on in my games to learn it?
Oh, man.
I know.
So
like, what kind of positioning? Like defense? Like this deployment positioning?
So from what I
go
remember,
ahead, Anthony.
John's
actually
been playing a lot of GSC lately.
Okay.
Which is an unforgiving army if you misposition your unit.
So positioning is one of the most like hand-waved things in 40K. Now, this phrase is sometimes used for good, but it is often used for evil. One of the examples of it being used for good is Eric Latharis when he says that positioning is really important in GSC. What he's doing is distilling a very complex thing down to a single phrase and trying to impart that in a small amount of words because Eric hates technology. And if you talk to him on a voice chat, he'll explain this to you really thoroughly. But he's not going to type it all out. Most of the time, however, what positioning is used to describe for 40k is someone hand waving the fact that either there was a significant skill disparity in the matchup, and they're just describing it as positional error because that's faster than and less cocky sounding than saying I blew the doors off my opponent because they made a whole bunch of mistakes, or an army is not that powerful, and because of point one, someone is doing better with it than they typically would, and they are pointing at positioning as the reason why. Usually, positioning specifically in a game depends on what type of army you're playing. For me, aggressive positioning looks like not chasing units, but setting up your charge range so it covers an objective. So that if someone wants to touch an objective, they get punched in the mouth. So you're not just getting kited around the board all game. Defensive positioning is things like staying wholly out of charge ranges, or making it so that charges have to be an 11, or pre-measuring angles if you're playing against a shooting army. There are a lot of small aspects like that, but very often, I don't want people to like play a difficult thing, lose with it, and then like ask someone that doesn't have time to explain the nuance and then feel like they're being dumb, because that's not what's happening. It's just not. Positioning is like a really general term for something that isn't going to be explained quickly, and that's just like the quick shorthand that you're getting. But as many, actually what Tom said, like as many of Eric's games as you can physically find to watch, I would recommend doing. There's like a handful of players that I have like a 10 out of 10 respect level for. Eric is in that category. If you want to see what the movement of GSC should look like, that's it. But yeah, that's a thing.
What I'm hearing is that what really positioning is the like determining how you want your game plan to go over the next turn or two.
Yeah.
More than like just positioning, but like being able to plan
it's
ahead.
not just like where your
and to take your opponents
is like, you know, there's any number of reasons why they're there.
And as you put it, it's distilling a very complex set of instructions down to one line.
Yep.
Makes sense. So just have an episode where we bring on Eric and have him explain positioning for 3 hours.
I could definitely get Eric on to make content. Like that's definitely a thing.
Well, I guess if people like it, we should definitely have people on who are experts at like one thing. The guy who has practiced that kick 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Like a video series about individual aspects of gameplay where we bring experts on to give tutorials on those aspects of gameplay.
Wait, sounds like something we've talked about before, Cliff.
We've never talked about that one before.
Where could we possibly have talked about that before, Cliff? I can't imagine where.
Cliff business ideas, Thomas.
Yeah, and Sam chiming in from who played Eric a week ago. Was able to move knowing how I would move and be out of range or out of sight and preparing for that situation. Like that comes with gameplay knowledge, army knowledge, and then also the idea of this ability to plan out ahead, which even I'm terrible
at. Tim.
I do like Tim's comment, and I feel like just adding it in because I think it's funny. Oh, God dang it. We all clicked it. You go. There we go. My favorite response when someone hand waves something is too slow / predictable. Well, it's a good thing objectives don't move. It's the truth.
Yep.
Oh, man.
I think about that a lot. It's a good thing the objectives don't move. Otherwise, I'd be in a lot of trouble a lot of the time.
Same.
Idris has a question of how far in advance do you plan your turns? I try to plan just like one turn in advance because that's like the limit of my capabilities as a player, is just to plan for like what the next phase is and like what my opponent's next phase is. That's all I can try to plan for. That is my limit as a player. I'm sure there are players out there who plan like 5 full turns of their game like in advance and just like do their plan. But like that's Also, not how I play the game of 40K, although I'm sure maybe Anthony or Jeremy, maybe, I don't know, or Cliff, I don't know if you guys plan your games fully in advance.
No. I do deploy, so I'm used to playing on a Vassal. We've got those like bubbles from which you can extend like the range on a given unit. So like I deploy and move around such that I'm like, okay, this means that there are like certain places on the board that I will no longer be able to be in like 2-3 turns time. I want to make, if I think that I might have to be there with the unit that I'm moving, I like try to make sure that I'm covering as broad an area as possible to preserve options down the line. But I'm not like, and then he'll do this. You know, like I can't like
That's not. Yeah, like I said earlier, no one does that accurately. In the entire time that I've played this, I've met one person that I've seen that even tries to and does it well.
Yeah, it feels like something that came from chess, where like a lot of games have been shown and like planned in advance, and you memorize some of those tables and stuff like that. Like the actual like move and response from chess stuff can be memorized. I don't think you can do that with 40K. I think the game is just too complicated. You might be able to plan like 2 turns in advance. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe somebody will go into my DMs and tell me that they plan every game that they play 5 turns in advance.
If they do, just tell them it's a dice game, and unless they are predicting every single possible outcome of those dice when they get engaged, not going to happen.
Look, just a little Jedi
Just
mind
invite
trick.
them.
You know.
Yeah. If someone
Just
can do
invite
that and beat me and be right the entire time, I'll give them $50.
Yeah. To be clear, we were real close to no longer playing a dice game with Codex
This close.
coming out. Real close.
Do we have any more
right,
questions that we
boys.
want to try to answer?
Not really, actually. At this point, we've gone through most of the really interesting questions. There's a few that have been repeats from previous weeks, and a few usual joke questions.
They made me upset, is what they did. That's mostly what they did. They made me upset. Is what happened.
I feel that's just like every coach and captain's like actual mood about players making points predictions in WTC. I think that's just every mood from WTC. As Jeremy like has like a moment where he's really upset because he's turning real pink on screen.
I have it's actually behind me. It's underneath a stack of shit, so I can't grab it. But I have a binder full of predictions versus actual scores from the WTC. Tom is very familiar with this. I was yelling at some of my players like, "How did you turn what you said was a 12-8 in your favor to a 20-0 in theirs?" That kind of thing.
See, I thought you turned around so that you could yell at the corner and like turned your microphone up so we couldn't hear it. Like you were just so upset that you had to viscerally just like express
Nope,
it.
I was debating grabbing it, and then I realized it's underneath it's underneath a few other things. But yeah, like it.
Yeah,
player predictions are. They can try to foresee how things are going, but and I think Anthony can relate to the same when it comes to predictions on the American squad.
Confidence intervals, people. Don't give me a score. You're lying. You have no fucking clue how this is gonna go. Give me just a quick read of the matchup. I don't need the specifics. Yeah,
yay, nay, or eh.
Yeah, just an idea of a trend, folks, please.
Did it ever go the other way? Did you ever get somebody giving you like, man, I don't know, I might not do this. It's going to be like an 8-12 them. And they're like, oh, weird, 20-0 me. I didn't know that was going to happen. I love it.
Yeah, it definitely did happen. And I mean, it also happened for the opponents where they would go into it and say, and I'd be talking to the coach and it's like, yeah, my buddy over there said there was going to be like a 14-6 in his favor. And your guy flipped it on his head and played in a way that I've never seen before. So yeah, it happens all the time, and it happened both ways for us. Like the big thing is we can do it. We've done entire episodes on this, but when it comes to team events, being able to accurately predict both ways matters.
Yeah,
because it informs how you do your pairings.
The biggest example of that for the US at the WTC was every single team thinking that John's Custodes list was shit and then getting run the fuck over. Goddamn hilarious. Oh, it was so funny.
Repeatedly.
Shout out to Mr. Lennon.
There you go. Right.
Yeah.
So on that note, thank you everybody for watching our show tonight. Please go press all of the buttons, comment on the things. If you really love our content and can afford to do so, we would love it if you could financially support this show by going to patreon.com/statcheck, I believe, /c/statcheck, maybe, I don't know. Otherwise, it's at youtube.com/statcheck. This is our weekly show. It's on at 5 p.m. Central Standard Time, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, some ungodly time in Australia, and I think 11 p.m. Scottish time. I don't know what time zone Scotland is in.
UK time, something like that. All right. Thanks,
it's 11,
nerds.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye-bye.